People are saying that Gresham's law is why they're not spending Bitcoin. I disagree with that entirely. I think that there may be some other reasons why people are not wanting to spend Bitcoin. At some point, hyper-Bitcoinization, as some people would put it, comes at someday when we're spending Bitcoin. I don't see why that can't be now. I have been building in Bitcoin since about 2017, and so I've started a few projects of my own. My most recent one is called Mana. You're growing the economy because you're dealing with, in my opinion, higher quality people, because you have a higher quality money, but you're also encouraging the build out of the infrastructure that's required for Bitcoin to proliferate. When you fill up the Bitcoin barrel, there's no holes in it. It keeps all of its water. The Fiat barrel has a ton of holes in it. If we're the ones running the nodes, then we're the ones that get the say. If the major institutions and the state level actors are the ones running the nodes, then they're the ones that are going to get the say. I would love to see it become popular to just say, I'm not updating my Bitcoin node. This is what it is. And if you want to update Bitcoin, you're going to need to convince me, rather than just handing the keys over to somebody else and letting them do, complete updates for you and then updating your node automatically. I don't think that's the right way to go about doing things.
Before we get started, you have been on already once, so I want to still give the people that haven't seen the first episode and maybe are not familiar with you a quick overview of like, who are you and why you're excited about Bitcoin?
So my name is Simecka. I have been building in Bitcoin since about 2017. And so I've started a few projects of my own. My most recent one is called Mana. It is a Bitcoin only self-custodial Lightning wallet, basically a payments platform. And so we focus on the wallet side, and we also spend a lot of focus on merchant adoption too. So that's what I've been up to lately. I spend a lot of time on X, aka Twitter, just posting and sometimes making people mad, sometimes making people happy. I just like to keep the conversation going. So that's me.
What's your favorite topic to make people mad?
I have some pretty strong thoughts on the mechanisms of how we view Bitcoin as money. One of the specific ones, I don't know if we talked about it on our last podcast that we did together, but I feel very strongly that Gresham's law does not apply to Bitcoin, and that's a very popular subject among a lot of Bitcoiners for why they are hesitant to spend their Bitcoin, and they will cite Gresham's law. But I have gone, in my opinion, all the way down that rabbit hole and back, and I have concluded with many, many hundreds of hours of research and discussion. And I've come to the conclusion decisively that Gresham's law absolutely does not apply to Bitcoin, for at least for the reason for not spending Bitcoin, specifically to Gresham's law. So
interesting.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just want to, because I think most Bitcoiners are familiar with Gresham's law, but like give the people an overview of like what this is for the few people that don't know about it.
Okay, yeah. So the euphemism that is applied to Gresham's law goes like this: bad money drives out good money in the economy, and that's the euphemism because that is the simple way of explaining Gresham's law to somebody that doesn't understand it. Now, I will say that euphemism is not in itself Gresham's law, and I've said this before too. It's like saying everything that goes up must come down to explain gravity. And although that's mostly true, and that explains, how gravity behaves in certain circumstances, there are things that go up that don't come down. Bitcoin being one of them over a long enough time horizon, right? So I just use that kind of tongue in cheek. But my point is, bad money doesn't have to drive out good money, depending on the qualifiers and the circumstances that are applied. When we're talking about historical monies, specifically physical coinage, Gresham's law is very applicable, and even that euphemism is very applicable as well, because we have historical precedent of what happens when governments or people that are controlling the currency, what happens when they dilute the physical content of the precious metals inside of the coins. And so that is what happens over time is the result of Gresham's law, which is bad money drives out the good money. And to put that, if anybody's completely unfamiliar with Gresham's law, and this is the first time they're hearing of it, what that means is that people will hold on to the coins that have the higher value. And a recent example I gave was in the I think it was 1965, they removed the silver from the quarter in the United States. And so they replaced it with an inferior alloy. And so what people would do is they would, of course, hold on to the pure silver quarter because the silver content of that quarter was more valuable than 25 cents. And so the government essentially pegged the value of a quarter to 25 cents, but they could not control the value of silver. It was, free market pricing. And so over time, what people would do is they would spend the 25-cent quarter and they would hold the quarter that was worth more. And so when we say bad money drives out good money in the economy, that just means that the money that ends up in circulation is just a bunch of the bad money because everybody's holding on to their good money, which is the pure silver quarters.
Interesting. It's also like if Gresham's law of the best money drives out the bad money is true, then why do we have fiat right now?
So bad money drives out good money, meaning like people will have the propensity to spend the bad money. And so that's the argument that Bitcoiners make for not spending their Bitcoin is they say, well, Bitcoin's the good money, so I'm going to spend dollars because it's the bad money. And they use Gresham's law to almost as an excuse for why they're doing this. But the problem is Gresham's law itself, it's applied completely differently. It's because there's an opportunity cost difference. And my argument is that there's either negligible opportunity cost difference between spending fiat versus spending Bitcoin, or it's the other way around, in which it's actually more expensive to spend fiat than it is for Bitcoin, especially if you're living on a Bitcoin standard. Because your purchasing power is getting eroded. There may be some advantages for swapping in and out of the different currencies for fees and stuff like that. But I'm not going to get too far into that. What I would say is my argument is at a minimum is that the opportunity cost for spending Bitcoin is not greater than spending fiat. But we can argue about the details on that. But my point is, people are saying that Gresham's law is why they're not spending Bitcoin. I disagree with that entirely. I think that there may be some other reasons why people are not wanting to spend Bitcoin. I argue those two. But my point is a common one is Gresham's law, and that one's an easy one, in my opinion, to discredit and disprove once you understand what Gresham's law is and how it works.
I have a very simple argument why I do want to spend my Bitcoin. I mean, for me, it's kind of a no-brainer because I earn in Bitcoin around 70 to 80% of my income in Bitcoin, but I only am able to spend directly in Bitcoin around like 10 to 20% of my expenses. So naturally, I either have to borrow more and more against my Bitcoin or have to sell my Bitcoin that comes in. And when I sell my Bitcoin, I still have more Satoshis at the end of the month than at the beginning of the month. I just sold some of the Bitcoin because I earn in Bitcoin. People get triggered by saying sell Bitcoin, but like I still save more Bitcoin than I had previously. I would argue even if you don't earn in Bitcoin, it does not matter if you spend in Bitcoin or in fiat. Let's say you are a lunatic like me and you are 100% in Bitcoin. If you earn now fiat and convert it directly into Bitcoin, as you should be if you're 100% in Bitcoin, and then you have to spend some fiat, then you can sell Bitcoin and in that moment of sell. So you are maximum exposed to Bitcoin. Then the argument is, oh, but with Bitcoin, you have to pay capital gains tax. And I'm like, okay, capital gains tax, and what is it? It is on something that you made a capital gain on. So instead of holding fiat, you held Bitcoin. And because you held Bitcoin, you made a plus. And on that plus, you get capital gains tax. So yes, you have to give more taxes, but you made a plus. If you don't make a plus whilst other than holding the fiat, you don't have to pay taxes on that. So overall, it's a better decision to have the Bitcoin, because if you make a loss, you don't have to pay taxes. If you make a plus, you have more than if you would have held the fiat. So my argument is, the longer and the bigger and the better the exposure to Bitcoin is, outside of going into debt. I just don't like it ethically, but you can do it's probably a good financial decision. It's the best way to have exposure to Bitcoin, the more exposure you have, if that makes sense.
It does, and I agree. There aren't a lot of people, just percentage-wise, that agree with that. And I think that number is growing. I think the number of people that are getting on board with this idea is going up. And what I'm seeing as a potential reason for that is, I don't think, if I could just make an assumption here, you probably weren't on that mindset, a few years ago. Even though you knew about Bitcoin, you probably had Bitcoin, you probably hadn't convinced yourself yet. And I think the biggest factor of that is time and watching your dollars go down and your Bitcoin go up. And eventually, in our minds, we realize what's happening, and that the more exposure we have to fiat, the more that's lowering our value, and the more exposure we have to Bitcoin, the more is raising our value. And again, I think it's just a matter of time, because the people that I see converting that weren't necessarily convinced before, I mean, some people get it right away, but the majority of people that I see that are kind of switching their mindset and switching their finances around to be more of on a Bitcoin standard are typically the people that have been in here a while. And so they're watching the value of their net worth go up significantly more and more and more and more just because of their exposure to Bitcoin. Why would you not? Because you'd have to convince yourself that Bitcoin was going to go down over time if that wasn't the case. And so if your assumption is that Bitcoin's going to continue to go up forever, it's hard to make a case to hold on to any amount of fiat. Now, I don't go out and say that like you shouldn't spend fiat if you have it. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. But I do advocate for people to spend more Bitcoin when they can. And it's a personal thing, in the sense that, you're able to gain maximum exposure to Bitcoin in this regard. And I think it will help you, again, assuming that the Bitcoin price, in relation to dollars goes up. We're just going to assume that's the case for my arguments here. But on a personal level, your net worth is going to go up. The amount of value that you have, your purchasing power is going to go up if you're holding more of an exposure on the Bitcoin side. But it's so much more than that, right? That is, in my opinion, that is just a small benefit, right? Because, maybe you're a Bitcoiner, you have your stack, but, you also have this little stack on the side of fiat that you want to keep out of Bitcoin. I don't think is necessarily logical, but maybe you're like, oh, I can't buy Bitcoin with this because of Gresham's law. Gresham's law says I can't do it. And so I'm going to listen to, what somebody said on a podcast sometime because this is what makes sense to me. Anyway, I think that's a logical fallacy. But my point is, that's just one aspect of the benefits of converting to Bitcoin. The other benefits are, I think, more impactful, and that is the benefits of the economy as a whole. Because the more we go out and we find people that take Bitcoin as payment, we find Bitcoiners to do business with. The first thing is, I think the quality of the products and the services that we get is going to go up. The quality of the people that we deal with, I think, have a higher level of integrity. Generally, in my experience, there's much more of a focus on the quality of the product and services that they give you, just because of their mindset of having a better, more sound harder money. And it kind of ties into a lot of aspects of our lives. I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that when you run into Bitcoiners, they tend to be fairly obsessive with, health and, healthy practices, whether it's, whether how they're eating, maybe potentially, exercising more, people turning their lives around for the better, just because they figured out that, that now they can preserve their wealth further into the future. And so they become, typically they become less, they lower their time preference, and they're discounting the future much less, because now that they're, a Bitcoiner, now that they have Bitcoin, they don't have to worry about fighting this constant uphill battle of maintaining purchasing power into the future. And so you're growing the economy because you're dealing with, in my opinion, higher quality people, because you have a higher quality money, but you're also encouraging the build out of the infrastructure that's required for Bitcoin to proliferate. No matter who you are, no matter where you are in this argument, I think that everybody, or at least the vast majority of people, would agree that at some point we have to transition to using Bitcoin as a currency. Even the people on the other side of the camp that are like, oh no, Bitcoin is a capital asset for store of value, and you should not spend Bitcoin. I think that even the majority of that camp would agree that at some point, hyper Bitcoinization, as some people would put it, comes at someday when we're spending Bitcoin. I don't see why that can't be now. And I think that on an individual level, it absolutely can be. I think we can adopt Bitcoin individually and start spending Bitcoin right now. So I think spending Bitcoin, it promotes the proliferation of that infrastructure development. It's going to encourage businesses to accept Bitcoin. You take a look at some of the big ones like Steak and Shake, a massive food chain, fast food chain in the United States. Now they're taking Bitcoin as payment at their restaurants. I've had it many times. I'm going to continue to give them my business because they're taking a better form of money. I recently made a post on X that I joined a premium subscription for a company called Angel Studios. They're kind of like a competitor to Netflix or Hulu or Amazon or whatever, but they make their own movies and TV shows. And they just recently announced that they're using a Bitcoin treasury standard. So they already have purchased Bitcoin for the treasury, and they're going to continue to add to that. And so I want to give my money to Bitcoiners. It's kind of like the same reason why people want to buy things from their local community. They want, if you're in the United States, a lot of people want to buy things that are made in the United States. If you're in your country, you want to buy things that are made in your country and grow the economy locally. And I think it's a very similar mindset. I want to give my money and my value to the people that are going to use it for the things that I think are important. And so whether that's Bitcoin or maybe some other aspect of my life, there are certain types of people with certain values that I want to promote and give my money to, rather than giving my money to organizations and companies that I think are more detrimental to what my values are.
It's so interesting. I love this argument also of growing the ecosystem. And maybe I can tell you the reason why I, like the simple, honest reason why I didn't do it earlier. It was just because I was lazy and I didn't want to change my behavior. So even I had the podcast, and I have I've told that story, I think 2-3 times on the podcast. I didn't accept Bitcoin payments till the Bitcoin Way reached out to me, and they kind of want to partner up with me on the podcast. And they're like, hey, like, why are you not accepting Bitcoin payments? And Tony kind of called me out on that. I was like, yeah, I really should do that. And the Bitcoin Way kind of opened that for me. I was like, okay, like I will I will accept Bitcoin payments now. I didn't want to deal with, oh, what do I have to do for bookkeeping? What do I have to do with like business wise? It turns out it's super easy, easier than fiat. Honestly, it's like I don't even know how to accept fiat payments from across. I probably need like PayPal or Wise or anything like that, and they take a hefty fee, way more than Bitcoin on-chain transaction fee currently. So the simple reason was like I didn't want to change my behavior. I was lazy. On the receiving side. And once I got the receiving side, I was like, oh, actually, I get Bitcoin. But I have fiat bills. Like, how do I do that? And there's like, yeah, like there's Bring In, and I just like I can revert that. And there's like Bull Bitcoin. There are many other providers that just like you give them Bitcoin, they send you they send you the euros. You can even send directly to someone else's bank account instantly, and you don't even see the euros. Like there are great services out there where you can actually live on a Bitcoin standard and sell at the very moment, or a Bitcoin credit card or Bitrefill. Like the more I think about it, the more providers are there. And so it's just about, I think, changing the behavior. And it's the easy way to just like, you get your fiat payment, whatever you want to save in Bitcoin, you put it on exchange, then you put it on exchange, convert it to Bitcoin, get it in your self-custody setup. I mean, if you have that setup, you're already better than like most people. Like you are like the top 1%. If you have self-custody, if you save most of your money in Bitcoin, it's like literally you're already like a top Bitcoiner. But the next step is like spending that and really kind of operating on a Bitcoin standard. And I had some guests on that did that. There are many different ways you can do it. Either find many places where you can pay with Bitcoin, but you also have to. There are fiat things that you have to just pay that are just in fiat, and you cannot convert them to Bitcoin. So you can have a credit card that you pay off at the end of the month. So like there are many different strategies to do that. And I just want to convert as much to Bitcoin. I want to live as close to a Bitcoin standard as possible. And it does take some getting off your butt and changing some behaviors. And I think that's the simple reason why I didn't do it. And I think we would be astonished how many people have that laziness and changing of behavior as a reason, and just taking like, oh, Gresham's law as a kind of an excuse of like, oh, like I want to spend fiat first and not Bitcoin. No, it doesn't make, like, if you want to spend fiat, like then you have to hold fiat. Do you really want to hold fiat? Like, why the heck do you want to hold fiat?
I agree. And just to round back in case anybody misses, the reason why Gresham's law doesn't make sense is because if we take the example of when Gresham's law does apply, let's just look at the US quarters. We have one silver quarter and one, junk metal quarter. And you want to go buy something for 25 cents, you can go and you can buy it for 25 cents, or you can take your solid quarter, which I think is like $4 worth of silver now. So the question is, do you want to pay 25 cents for your product, or do you want to pay $4 worth of your product? That's the opportunity cost difference. Now with Bitcoin, there is no opportunity cost difference. If you want to pay 25 cents, you can pay 25 cents with US dollars, or you can pay 25 cents with Bitcoin, because it's completely fungible and divisible. So you don't have that divisibility issue where you can't physically take 25 cents out of your $4 solid silver quarter unless you're clipping it or smelting it down and recasting it or something like that. But that's very impractical. And so that's essentially one of the main reasons why Gresham's law applies, is because you have two different amounts that it would cost you. It would literally cost you more money to use your solid silver quarter than to just use the junk metal bad money quarter. Again, with Bitcoin, you can denominate any amount you want, and there's no opportunity cost difference, at least in that regard. But I don't want to beat that horse too much. I think I've probably stated my case, and if anybody wants to argue more with me on that, they're welcome to. But you mentioned and you brought up the Bitcoin Way. I was on their podcast last week, and since you brought them up, I'll just say they're great folks, and I definitely recommend people to go over there and they do a lot of like consultation type services to help people get on a Bitcoin standard. And so if you're watching this, you don't know where to go, if you'll allow me, like, I think the Bitcoin Way is a great place to start. I'm not paid by them. This is not an ad. This is just I think they're good people.
I'm paid by them, and I agree.
Okay, Robin's paid. I'm not.
They are official partner of the podcast, so
that's right.
I agree with that story.
Okay, good. I'm glad we agree.
I love your Twitter, by the way. You bring up some interesting takes in there, and I just scrolled through that before the podcast, and I was like, maybe we can even like go through one or two tweets and get nice talking point from there.
Yeah, let's do it.
The first one that stuck out to me, that was the most recent one, was think I'm gonna run nuts just to give a finger to core. Talk me out of it.
Yeah, so a little bit tongue in cheek, but also maybe some sincerity behind it too. This is a pretty controversial topic. All right, so obviously we're talking about core versus knots. The implementation for the node. Bitcoin Core, for anybody unaware, they rolled out and moved forward with a fairly contentious update. It wasn't a huge, massive change to the code itself, but what really stuck out was that a lot of people didn't agree with it, and they went forward with it anyway. And so a lot of people got mad, and a lot of people have essentially left Bitcoin Core for knots, and it's just they're running a knots node at this point. And I haven't actually made up my mind if I'm gonna do that or not, but I certainly don't agree with core, and at a minimum I wanted to put that message out there just to kind of signal that I don't agree with the direction that core went. It doesn't mean that I'm for sure never going to run core. I don't know if I approve of the most recent update, but more importantly than anything is I think that it's important for us to be able to always continue to have a choice. And so even if, knots doesn't necessarily solve any of the problems that really arose from this debate, and there's some arguments to be made there. The underlying point here is being able to choose what you're able to run. And since everybody was running Bitcoin Core, it was really, in my opinion, could be potentially dangerous. In this case, it was, in my opinion, a fairly benign change, but it sets a very bad example for the future, because they could potentially do the same thing with a much more major change. And some people would argue with me on that. Some people think that the op return modification was a big deal. I don't think, at least at this point, it's that big of a deal. I think there's a lot of potential risks and things that we just don't know. And I've said this before, and that is that, with the Taproot upgrade, there were a lot of things that came out of that. A lot of, I don't know. You had a lot of the inscriptions and ordinals stuff that came out of that update. Now, I understand that a lot of that could have happened with or without Taproot, but Taproot is what kind of woke us up to a lot of that. And I'm getting a little bit technical here, and I apologize, but my point is, we don't quite know what changing Bitcoin is going to do until it actually happens. And so I've always been a very strong proponent of not upgrading or fixing what's not broken. And in my opinion, I don't think that the op return change was necessary. If I would have had the opportunity to, signal or vote for that, I would have voted against it. Again, they went forward with the update anyway, though. So you don't have to update Bitcoin Core, by the way. So if you're running Core, sorry, there's a bug. If you're running Bitcoin Core, you don't have to update to the latest version, which is at a minimum what I'd recommend, just personally. That's just what I would do and what I would recommend to my family and friends. Just run an older version of Core. I don't think that there's necessarily any danger in just being cautious about updates in general anyway. Now back to specifically on the knots topic. I have my own hesitations with knots, but here's what I'll say. It is my opinion that the people that are maintaining knots and promoting it, it is my opinion that these people have good intentions. It is my opinion that these people are not adversarial to the development and proliferation of Bitcoin. The people that are maintaining core, I have the opposite opinion of. I think that they're actively they're an active detriment to the proliferation of Bitcoin. That is just my opinion. And that just simply goes back to the fact that it is also my opinion that a vast majority, or at least a large number of people, did not approve of the update that they did. And they essentially ignored everybody's feedback. And so, again, in my opinion, it just sets a bad precedent, sets a bad example. And so I think the best answer to all this is that we, fragment, how we're running Bitcoin. So I don't care if it's, knots or, maybe just not updating core, or maybe there's some other implementations that come out. I think that a variety of implementations that are being run, and any power that we can distribute away from Bitcoin Core, I think is ultimately a good thing.
It's super interesting. I've not been around at the Bloxers War, and I think this thing is way smaller than the Bloxers War, obviously. But we never know what small thing can lead to a very big thing. Because even if you go back to the Bloxers War, just if you have no clue and you don't think long term, and you're like, okay, let's increase the block size by like 2x. Okay, it's not that big of a deal. But like opening that box of just increasing the block size and then having maybe almost an automatic thing where we just always increase every year or every second year or every fourth year the block size just to fit more transactions in the base layer, that ultimately will lead at some point to people not being able to run a full node because it's just too expensive, and then it will be again too centralized. So we don't know what small change can maybe lead to a bigger problem down the road. So I'm always on the side of, you have to deliver an extremely good reason to change something. Otherwise, why change it? So the change has to be extremely well argued and not the current situation. And I think in doubt, we should stick with it and maybe just wait another half year, another year, and see like, okay, maybe there's another solution, or maybe there's consensus building. And I see that like if Core is implementing something and not really taking in the feedback, just doing it, as you said, that is at least a small red flag. And also, full disclosure, even though I'm a trained software developer and I did that for a career before Bitcoin, I have no clue about Bitcoin Core. I like even if I could develop software, even if I did that, like I actually did that for like multiple years. I don't want to pretend that I really have a clue, but just from a basic understanding, changing something in Bitcoin has to be extremely well argued and really well thought through before we do it, because we only got this one chance at sound money, I think. I think if we F up Bitcoin, there will be a long time till we have another chance at digital scarcity and sound money. I don't know if we can. I don't know if I see a second try. I think that's our chance, Bitcoin. Like, we really have to fight for this.
I do agree with you, but I see it in a little bit different way. I agree that Bitcoin is our only chance, at least, maybe in our lifetime. But my view on that is a little bit different, in that I think we've already opened Pandora's box. I think we've already found the one solution. And, even if the current path that we're on doesn't result in, this new age of hard sound money, I think that a version of Bitcoin will succeed. So whether that's the current version we're running today, or maybe there's a fork in the future. I think that the idea of Bitcoin is big enough, and dare I say, perfect enough. Not that Bitcoin is absolutely in every regard perfect, but I think it does have all of the tools necessary to usurp the central bank fractional reserve banking system, the state political banking system, whatever you want to call it. I think Bitcoin's going to kill fiat. I don't know for sure if the exact current version we have is going to kill fiat. Maybe we come up with maybe somebody finds some major bug or something and we have to change something. But the idea of Bitcoin, of this consensus mechanism that has been discovered or invented, however you want to put it, but what Satoshi put in motion, I think eventually leads to the inevitable collapse of fiat money, and the theft that occurs to that, because people just don't want to get stolen from. And that is what Bitcoin solves.
What do you think is there's advantages of running your own node outside of protecting the network, just like for your own good, like because if you spend Bitcoin and you don't run your own node, you're basically broadcasting to whoever runs that node for you. But let's leave that out of the way, the privacy aspect. What is the motivation to run your own node if it's kind of anyways, if Bitcoin anyways will succeed? If you like say like Bitcoin will succeed, I can lay back at the beach and I don't even have to care if not. So like block size war, like why be so emotional about it? If anyways, it will turn out good.
Good question. And I hope I have a good answer. I think I have a good answer. My answer to that is yes, Bitcoin is going to succeed. That's not the question for me. The question is, who does it succeed for? And if we're the ones running the nodes, then we're the ones that get the say. If the major institutions and the state level actors are the ones running the nodes, then they're the ones that are going to get the say. So I think Bitcoin ultimately succeeds. It ultimately wins. But my point is, if we're not the ones running the nodes, then we have no say, we have no power, we have no control, and we can't hold anybody else accountable. So the only way to hold other people accountable in the network is to run a node. And I think that that's really what it comes down to, is which group of people gets to be in control of the ship. And I would rather it just be average, people. I want it to represent, the average person, or at least the most amount of people. And so that's why I'm a strong advocate for keeping nodes easy to run. I was around for the block size war, and I advocated for, the small blocks, all the way through. And I never changed my mind. And the primary reason was because I wanted more people to be able to run nodes, and making the block size bigger would have immediately made it harder for people to run nodes. And so, yeah, that's kind of my argument there. It's running a node. I don't want to get, attacked for saying this, but it's not as big of a deal as some people make it out to be. It's not like a lot of people confuse running a node with mining, and they're like, okay, well, if I run a node, I'm going to get money, I'm going to get paid. Or they think about it in terms of like running a lightning routing node or something like that. Running a Bitcoin client for the blockchain, layer one node, you don't necessarily get paid to do that. It's a labor of love. You're using your own hardware, your own electricity, but what you're doing is you are casting a vote. Essentially, you're participating in the consensus, the governance of what Bitcoin is. And it also kind of comes down to, I'm an American. We have a great foundational history of, this sovereign principle of the liberation that we had and the revolution that we had from, Great Britain. And then our founding fathers, instituted, this responsibility of running our own government, and not the other way around. Not the government running the people, but the people running the government. And I think that a good representation of that in the modern age, since my country seems to have lost a lot of that vision, but a good representation now is in Bitcoin, because we get to have a voice. There is very minimal barrier to entry to have that voice in the Bitcoin network, and all you have to do is run a node. And back to our conversation earlier about, the core and knots, like you get to choose which one, what you want to run, what version of Bitcoin you want to run. Like you have that choice. And if you don't like the updates that somebody does, like Bitcoin Core with the op return update, you don't have to run that. And that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is 100% opt-in, and anybody can run the code. Anybody.
I love that. Man, your tweets are really, they're something else, man.
I get that a lot.
I cannot believe that you just have 10K followers. Like you should have a lot more, I feel like. I barely can decide, but there's like one good one, and maybe we can touch on like Trump in general, the strategic Bitcoin reserve and things like that with that tweet. But the tweet said, okay, everything aside, I want to know the actual truth. What's the point of Trump coin? Like seriously.
I don't even remember that one. I think it was just so you got to understand me on X, half of it is very serious. I put time and work into half of my stuff. The other 50% is just like stuff I throw out there to have fun. You may call it engagement farming, whatever you want to call it. But I just like to get people talking. And I think that was probably one of those, I love it. I think I understand enough about Trump coin to make my decision about it.
I do the same thing with making tweets about why 0.1 Bitcoin is generational wealth, will buy you the dream house, like I made, I think like at that point like 40 different tweets about that, and it always triggers people so much. And I never put a timeline on that because that would be just bonkers. Like I have no clue when Bitcoin will go to what price target, but I'm for sure that 0.1 Bitcoin will be at some point such a big amount of wealth. But yeah, it might be 10 years, might be 100 years, might be 1,000 years. I don't know.
I agree. And I think a good way, I was actually just thinking about this today. I think a good way to look at that is to flip it around and think about the amount of value that your fiat currency has. Okay. So your central bank political currency, whether it's the euro or the dollar, think about the perpetual, because we can go back before 2009, before 2008, before Bitcoin was ever even an idea. And we can look at the continual loss of value and purchasing power of the fiat currency that we're using. So you can even take Bitcoin out of the equation. Like for my argument, like who cares what the price of Bitcoin is in dollars or euros? Look at what your fiat currency is doing. Like, what is your fiat currency worth in 10 years compared to Bitcoin, rather than what is Bitcoin worth compared to fiat? So I think if you turn that around, it's easy to say, instead of saying, Bitcoin's going to be worth over $1 million in 4 years. Okay. Like, I could make that case, but I think it, in my opinion, helps get people thinking more rationally. If you just turn it around and say, I think the dollar is going to collapse to $10 million per Bitcoin in 4 years. And I think that there is plenty of case to be made for that too. So it's not just, in my opinion, it's not just the fact that I think Bitcoin is going to appreciate in value, which I think it is, but it's certainly predicated on the collapse of fiat, the slow and inevitable decline and eventual death of the currency with a hole in the bucket, which is inflation, money printing, quantitative easing. They keep adding, they have to keep adding more buckets of water because it's leaking, So when you fill up the Bitcoin barrel, there's no holes in it. It keeps all of its water. The fiat barrel has a ton of holes in it, and it requires a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of money printing to keep that thing full.
Or to say it in your own words on Twitter, Bitcoin is kind of dumb. All it does is preserve wealth, enable unstoppable payments, and take power away from central banks.
That's great. And I think that goes back to some of the things that we were saying earlier in my opinions on what I like about Bitcoin, in that I don't need it to be fancy. I don't need all these op return updates, right? I've even said, like, I would prefer to run a client that didn't have any updates, no maintainers. I've been pretty positive about ossifying Bitcoin, meaning, no updates at all. I'm okay with, like, in the future, if we have some need to do it, then let's have that conversation. But I would love to see it become popular to just say, I'm not updating my Bitcoin node. This is what it is. And if you want to update Bitcoin, you're going to need to convince me, rather than just handing the keys over to somebody else and letting them do, complete updates for you and then updating your node automatically. I don't think that's the right way to go about doing things.
You also have, I just filtered tweets that have like 100 likes or more, and there are some in there where you call for paper Bitcoin. It was especially like in the ETF days, and also like 1-2 where you were critical of Seyr, what he's doing with like yield on Bitcoin. How do you look in general around so many institutions now being in Bitcoin? And when you were also in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, the focus on treasury companies, the focus on borrowing against the Bitcoin, the focus on like give institutional your Bitcoin, it's undeniably big. How do you look at those developments, and if it potentially is even like a narrative risk for Bitcoin?
Absolutely think that there is some risk there. I'll say this. I am convinced that there is a claim to more than 21 million Bitcoin. Okay. I think that is, in my opinion, not a controversial thing to say. I think there are more people out there that think they have Bitcoin that accounts for more than 21 million of them. So just that fact alone, I'm saying, there is, in my opinion, absolutely paper Bitcoin. Paper Bitcoin has existed. Does it still exist? I think the likelihood of that is nearly 100%. And by paper Bitcoin, I just mean claim to Bitcoin that maybe someone else also has claim to, right? So if you and I both buy, 100,000 sats, but the place that sold it to us sold us the same 100,000 sats, that's an example of paper Bitcoin. Another example of paper Bitcoin would be, buying stock in one of these Bitcoin treasury companies, and maybe they're not fully, reserved with what they say they have. I'm not going to make any individual claims or cases about which companies I think do or don't have, their reserves. I think, it's easy to throw stones, but obviously the biggest fish is strategy, right? They have the biggest reserve, so to speak. Now, personally, I hold shares inside of a retirement account with strategy, and so I like strategy. I absolutely adore Seyr. I think he's done so many great things for Bitcoin. With that said, I would like to see them publish their proof of reserve address. I understand his points, that he's made recently, in that it is not a silver bullet, and there's a lot more to what really matters, but it's one small piece, and I think that just as a shareholder, I would like to see that. I don't think that it changes anything I think about them, or whether or not I would hold their stock in my retirement account. But I do appreciate companies and organizations and even countries who publish their reserves. I think that's good to be able to see, to hold people accountable. I don't think that it's a necessary thing to do for an individual, but if you have investors or constituents, I see value in that. So yeah, I mean that's what I'd say on that. I think if you're holding a lot of Bitcoin for other people, I think the best way to help squelch some of the potential concern of the rehypothecation and the quote unquote paper Bitcoin, the proof of reserves helps at least ease some people's minds. Yeah, and I understand it. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I've made plenty of posts, many, for the last few years about how proof of reserves does not include, the liabilities. And I've said it in this way that, I could prove that I have X number of Bitcoin, but there could be derivative claims to that Bitcoin, which is more paper Bitcoin, right? So I could have paper Bitcoin on top of that. Proof of reserves does not prove that there's not rehypothecation.
It's very true. It's just like one step in the right direction.
It's just one step, yeah.
And it's also just like not even half the side. You're right, because like half the side would be like showing what you have as an asset, but then also showing your liabilities. And then showing, is the paper Bitcoin, does someone else have claim also to those Bitcoin? Because it could be like, it's also hard. I don't know, like they probably can do it because like they I don't know how Strategy custodies their Bitcoin, but there are many different custodians where they probably hold it. They don't have it probably with just like one, but they can definitely do it. The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch, and ever since then I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from Coin Vigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. So you wanted to say something on that?
I was just going to say, I think personally that the only solution to that is, and I've said this before, but the only solution is proof of reserves of the keys you control, the coins you control. So, taking self-custody. I don't necessarily advocate for people letting someone else hold their Bitcoin for them. I think that it is always a better idea to have your own Bitcoin. And even going back to the topic of Bitcoin treasury companies, like if you have the choice between investing in a Bitcoin IOU, which is what a Bitcoin treasury company is, or buying your own, bearer asset Bitcoin, my recommendation for every person is to buy the bearer asset as long as that makes sense for them. Like I said, I own some of these Bitcoin treasury companies in my portfolio, but that's because I have a retirement account and I don't have access. I don't have the ability that the government does not let me buy real Bitcoin with that money. And I think that's another case for, where a lot of this money is coming from. It's, certainly not all of it, but a big portion of it is driven by the market that needs Bitcoin exposure, but because of maybe tax or legal reasons, they can't buy the real thing. And that's why I have some of these stocks rather than, if I had the choice, I would just have all 100% real cold storage Bitcoin.
That's what I have. And people call me crazy. I had Seyr on the podcast. I was at the 100K party. Still haven't bought a single stock of MicroStrategy.
Yeah, if you don't have a reason to, I don't see why you should. Like
Michael Saylor himself says, buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean that's the real thing. Why buy the fake thing when you can buy the real thing? And when it comes down to it, when you're holding a stock, that doesn't really mean anything. Even in the case of Strategy, you don't necessarily have a claim to the Bitcoin that they hold, even legally, and they've said that. And so, yeah, I think we both agree. If you can buy Bitcoin, just buy Bitcoin.
Didn't Seyr even last year sell his stock to buy more Bitcoin?
Did he what? Oh, sell his stock to buy more Bitcoin? We know he sold his stock. He as well as Fong Li and I think Andrew Yang also sold some stock in November, quite a bit. And I think the understanding was that they bought Bitcoin. I don't remember following up on that or not. I know that they have to legally disclose I believe they have to legally disclose the Bitcoin that they buy. So I'm sure the information out there is public. It sounds like you may know more about that than I do, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I just looked it up on Grok. I remember something. I think like they sell like 5,000 shares, but I don't want to tell anything about that because I just remember it. I just know that he's a big advocate for like just buy the Bitcoin. Really cool. I have one more tweet that I want to get into. Guys, I really do think renaming sats to Bitcoins is the best way forward. Yes, it does bother me a little bit, but I think the benefits far outweigh the cost. No, this isn't a joke. Seriously, think about it.
This is another one I forgot about. What was the date on that?
3rd of December, 2024.
Okay. So yeah, this was, oh man, that wasn't too long ago. Okay. I feel like this was before it recently caught a whole lot of momentum and attention. This topic of how we account for the units of Bitcoin. This was popularized, I think, primarily through John Carvalho, and he has even submitted a formal BIP or Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, which is the process of making a request to Bitcoin code. And he has basically stated that he wants to rename or at least name or designate the individual units, which a lot of people now call Satoshis, 1/100 millionth of a full coin. If you're on that wavelength, call them Bitcoin. So there's no sats, it's just Bitcoins. And so the implications of that would essentially be, at least the big ones would be that we would now have, we would send each other Bitcoins. We would no longer have to explain what a sat is. And so that's the benefit of all of the adopters from this point forward. They wouldn't have to have that obstacle or perhaps even the unit bias of figuring out, oh, well, I'm either getting a certain number of sats, which I don't even know what that word means, or maybe it's 0.0000148 Bitcoins. Like that doesn't really compute too well for people. So that's the argument for it. I guess one of the biggest disadvantages in my mind is that we would no longer have that 21 million meme, right? So now there's, if this BIP was potentially, there was consensus behind it and we actually rolled forward with it, it would now be 2.1 quadrillion. And also, for the same reasons why the unit bias is a problem for using, the smaller numbers, then the unit bias becomes kind of another issue because we have this large 2.1 quadrillion number. And when you try to explain, there's, a finite amount of Bitcoin, it's limited, and you have to explain to them there's only 2.1 quadrillion of them. I mean, that doesn't sound very scarce, right? At least when you say there's only 21 million Bitcoin, well, there's 8 billion people on the planet and not everybody get to have a whole one. I think that psychologically helps, reinstill the scarcity aspect of it. So there's, I think it goes both ways. I've personally gone back and forth, and I'm not done going back and forth. I've been on the SAT side. I've been on the 2.1 quadrillion Bitcoin side. Today I'll tell you right now where I stand is I'm still on the SAT side right now. I can be convinced. I'll just put this out there. Like, I can be convinced if enough people want that. I just don't know if that's the case. I think that there is a lot of pushback on doing that, and I can see why. I can see both sides of it. I think there's benefits to both. So ultimately, I think what I will end up doing is just what everybody else wants. I have my own Bitcoin platforms. I have the ability to roll these out into my products. Right now, I'm using Sats. One of the ideas that I've thought about is letting users decide what they want to have displayed. I haven't done that yet, but it is on the table. So right now, I'm on Sats, but I don't know. That might change.
It's also, even if you let users decide what's the default.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yep.
I think it's not impossible to change it from like Sats to Bitcoin, but with every day, it will get more impossible to actually change it because people are used to a name, and then changing it will just be like, oh, like, why should we change it? Like, why like the reason has to be good, similar than the code base. But obviously, like, changing a name is, I think, not dangerous to Bitcoin. But it's an interesting point of saying, like, oh yeah, there's a limited amount of Bitcoin. How many are there?
1 quadrillion.
So, people can imagine millions, because like millions like is in our language. Could really, like, that's not in our language. That we barely use it. Like, if you're not a mathematician or like some physicist that like uses it on a daily basis, most people don't handle those kind of numbers. So it's an interesting point of why to change it to that. But yeah, like, I don't know.
I think if it's gonna happen, you'd have to have mass buy-in from a lot of big players. And one of the biggest players that's pushing this is Jack Dorsey. And of course, he's got Block, he's got, Cash App, he's got the Square payment terminals, right? So he's got a lot of penetration in the market. And, if he goes and he does this, and some other people follow, I think that there's a chance of it actually catching on. But what we don't want is for a lot of this fragmentation. And I think you mentioned this, like, it could be dangerous to just change something right now. We don't really quite know what all that would entail and lead to. I think that if we actually just made the switch, and there was a clean break, it would be fine. But it would be all this in between, all this confusion of, people not really understanding or knowing how much to send, and there would be a little bit of communication issue. Obviously, their argument is that wouldn't happen. And I'll just say, from my understanding, the argument to that is, when you're speaking in terms of whole coins, it's a very different scale. It's 100 million scale difference. So when you say, I want 24, 25, or let's just say, you're selling something and you're selling it for 2,500 Bitcoins, right? Obviously, you're not asking for 2,500 million, 20, whatever. You're not asking for like the current, man, this math is hard. We don't do well with these big scales, but at least me, I don't know.
I want to bring another point up with namings and brandings. Do you remember how long it has been since Twitter is called X?
I could take a guess. 2.5 years.
Yeah, like a little bit shorter actually. It's almost 2 years. It was July 23. People still refuse to call it X.
I think even on this podcast episode, I think I even said some people call it Twitter. I don't know. I think I did.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I have to go back in the transcript. I don't remember, but it's names, once they are established, and the Satoshis, they're so established in our language, just like everything with it. It's really hard to get it out. Like, it has names have network effects. It's weird, but they have. So changing that would require for not only big players to be on board, but for almost everyone to be on board, to make a very clean cut, and then also for all the big voices in Bitcoin to be on board. I think if there's confusion in there, it will be very hard. If there's like all of a sudden a Sats group that like, I refuse to call it Bitcoins. Like I'm a Sats guy. There can be wars on that. I think it's like it would be a fun time, honestly, because I personally don't stand on any on that specific issue. I don't really have a side, but it would be a fun time to be on Twitter and to be on podcasting. I'd probably make like daily live streams on it.
I think part of the reason why they've struggled is just because X is so, I don't know, it's not unique as Twitter, right? When you say Twitter, you know exactly what somebody's referring to.
Yeah, X is just a letter.
X is just a letter. It could mean so many different things, which I think is probably part of the point for why, they named it that. But this actually, I remember doing a study when I was in business school. There's a business concept of this, and it's basically, I wish I could even remember, this was so long ago, but there's a formal concept of what you're describing for when a brand has a certain amount of brand recognition and then changing over the costs associated from changing over that brand to a new platform. And anyway, there's a whole field of study on it in the business world. But it's a very big deal. It doesn't mean that it can't happen, though. I mean, look at MySpace, right? MySpace had the brand recognition. MySpace was the space, right? And they lost to Facebook. There are a lot of different reasons why, but ultimately Facebook beat them. They had a better product. And so if you have a product that's good enough, you can overcome that, but there is a serious headwind for doing that.
Yeah, like there are many positive and negative examples that we could pull up from changing brandings in both directions. I just think with every day passes, it will get harder and harder with new people getting is like the network effect. It would probably be really easy to do it like in 2012.
Well, I think that's what they're saying. Like, it's still early now. Like, Bitcoin adoption is like maybe less than 3%, and for the next 97%, we should do it now rather than later. And I agree, though. I think so. Are you familiar with the Lindy principle? Do you know Lindy?
The Lindy principle?
Yeah. So it's essentially the longer something exists, the more likely it is to continue into the future.
Oh, the Lindy effect. Yeah, like if it's something had like 15 years, it's very likely to have another 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, Sats is Lindy, right? That's the main challenge that the Bitcoiners, or we'll call them the 2.1 quadrillionaires, would be facing, is the Lindy effect.
Man, I loved our podcast episode. It was really cool. I've never done it actually. It was an idea that pretty much came like 2 minutes before the episode. I was like, oh, like that could be interesting, because I saw your tweet that you put out on Nuts, and I was like, oh, it could be interesting, because I recently saw it on another podcast. They made a 4-hour podcast just going through 40 tweets. I think it was Chris Williams with Alex Samosi. That was I listened to the first 2 hours. It was really nice. It was really fun. But I was like, yeah, like let's try that. Maybe I'll make a weekly episode where like I just pick someone and with an interesting Twitter and we go through his tweets. I feel like it's fun because we are different personalities on different platforms. So you speaking like Adam on a podcast thinks and argues slightly different than Adam on X, and probably a little bit different to like Adam in person without recording. And it's fun to bring those different personalities together. The same way I tweet very differently than I speak on the podcast, and it's just human nature, and it's fun to kind of converse those two things.
I'm a lot more careful about what I say when I'm in front of a camera.
Yeah, like, because it can be clipped and it can be viral.
Exactly.
and it's like there's this. Also, I think if there's another person, like if you're just typing, it might sound very good in your head, but it's really cruel if you just see the letters. And if you're speaking to another person, you're way more cautious. And I've met, I don't want to call out anyone, but I've met people on Twitter. Most people I meet first on Twitter, and I'm like, wow, you're so rude, like you're so like aggressive even. And then I meet them in person, and I was like, you're the nicest guy ever. Like you're so kind. And this is super interesting. I mean, your tweets are definitely not cruel. They pose nice questions, but there are some people that like really aggressively go against groups on Twitter, and then I meet them in person. Like, I like you're like the sweetest guy ever.
Well, let me make a case against myself real quick. Did you happen to catch the one? Unfortunately, one of my tweets went semi-viral recently about Steak and Shake. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know I haven't seen that.
Search for my tweets. Type in the name Jorge, Jorge. Anyway, I had a post that went semi-viral for all the wrong reasons. Basically, a lot of people were saying that I was calling out this guy for not wanting to accept Bitcoin at his chain, which, what I said, that part's kind of true. I said those things, but it was basically just kind of a synopsis of a conversation that I had with him. And then following up on that, I had suggested that people should reach out to him and let him know that, they support their decision to move forward with Bitcoin, and just kind of give him some support. But a lot of people took that as me being like sarcastic, and that I was suggesting that people should harass him. Anyway, it was a bad choice of language on my part. I never took back what I said. To this day, I still stand by what I said, just because it was honest and sincere. But it got a lot of negative attention, and a lot of people wanted to hurt me for saying those things.
I get that. And it's most communication is outside of the words. So like how you say something matters. I think it depending on what you say, but how you say a thing can really be the decide on how someone receives it. So you being sincere or sarcastic is really hard to tell on a tweet. Can flip either way. So that's also like, I mean, communication. You're well aware. Like most people are well aware. Most things are communicated with like non-verbal things and non-verbal cues, and how you say something, in what tone, like what's your body language, everything like that. And then just like a small part of like is the actual message. And on Twitter, it's just the actual message. That's why people love to argue. I stopped arguing on Twitter, but I have tweets and put out, and then I'm like, what was the recent tweet? I can't remember, but he argued on something completely different, and it was totally not related to my tweet. And I agreed with him, but he seemed to thought that I don't agree with him, and I was like, yeah, I agree. Like he was so stunned, like what? He wanted to attack me, and I was like, yeah, I agree with you. I don't know how you got that point from my tweet. Maybe I'll find it quickly when you speak.
There's no shortage of people that want to argue just to have a different opinion. Sometimes I'm that person.
It's very true, actually.
I like having a contrarian opinion, just sometimes because it's something that I know some people will disagree with. I try not, I'm never, I never try to be hostile about any of that. Like I try to always be friendly and respectful to everybody. But I think it's fun just to say, no, I have a different opinion, and here's why. Maybe I'm wrong, but I like taking opposite opinions because they're interesting and sometimes they're fun. One of which is not everybody, but for a long period of time, most people would have said that the Bitcoin fees, in regard to measuring the actual fee rate for Bitcoin, is going to continue to go up. And obviously fees on the layer 1 chain right now are really low in terms of sats per virtual byte. And my argument for many years is that the sats per virtual byte rate will maintain a low value. And in 2020, 21, 22, this was not a popular thing to say because everybody was of the opinion that, the sats per vbyte rate is going to go up and up and up and up and up and up. Anyway, I took the opposite side of that. So far, I've been right, but I don't know. I could be wrong at some point in the future. But I have a strong opinion that at least for a very long time, the fee rate for Bitcoin transactions is going to continue to be, within the realm of like 1 to 10 sats per vbyte for a very, very, very long time. At least it will continue to come back down to that. Now we might see periodic spikes, as of course we have. I think those will continue, but I think we're going to see these low fee rates for Bitcoin for a lot longer than most people think we are. And that's not to say that I don't think fees are going up. I'm just measuring it a little bit differently. So I'm measuring in the sense of actually looking at the sats per virtual byte. I think that's going to continue to come back to a baseline. In terms of the actual cost of the fees, measured in watts, or measured in gold or oil or labor hours, or even in fiat currency, I think the fees will continue to go up. But it's kind of counterintuitive because I don't think that that's actually going to reflect in the sats for vbyte unit of measure.
I found it, but I do agree with you. I just want to read that quickly. I wrote, and it's a perfect example of Twitter, I think. I wrote, since I adopted a Bitcoin standard, I sold at the time the newest iPhone, switched it to an older one. So basically sold an iPhone for like $700 and bought one for $100. I don't own a car because I live in a city where I just don't need a car. And if I need a car, I just rent it, which happens like 5 times a year maximum. I rent a small 1-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend, so I pay ridiculously low rent, less room to clean, more time, more money, a lot of good things about that. I don't buy alcohol, cigarettes, or any other drugs, and I only invest money in what gives me time back for my family. This part is very important, for my family, or increase my health. Everything else goes into Bitcoin. This is the Bitcoin way. And someone wrote that back to me. As the population implodes because of a lack of new families, this is self-centered approach and is unsustainable and ultimately unrewarding. And I was like, I don't even know if you read my tweet. It's not fitting together. It's like, I literally wrote that I want to live more frugally, to have more time with my family. And, yeah. So like sometimes I feel like people just skim through tweets and think they have an opinion on it and just quickly write it. So like that's where I think most arguments on Twitter actually come from, where you don't, there's like a small point that you disagree with, or like an overall feeling you do disagree with, and you just like go for it. And it's like a lot of misunderstandings. Like if I go through Twitter and a lot of like threads in Twitter, I see a lot of misunderstanding where people like they would agree with each other actually, and if they sit with a beer together on like a Saturday evening, they probably would be best friends. But because it's Twitter, they're fighting each other like dogs.
That's too bad. That is too bad. I think it's interesting because, I don't know, this is just anecdotal on my part, but it seems like the Bitcoin community tends to be more in favor of having large families. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
I agree. Definitely. Like people like Bitcoiners, that if I would poll all the Bitcoiners that have been on my podcast, they are in favor of having more babies than having less babies. So, yeah, like definitely. But Bitcoin is very big already. Like generalizing is harder and harder these days. Too big of a crowd already.
Some people just want to argue, man. Exactly. Maybe we could open up with that one. Copyright issues.
I have one question that I ask each and every one of my returning guests. And the question is, what have you learned since you have last been on the podcast outside of Bitcoin?
Wow. I've learned a lot. So as I briefly mentioned at the beginning, I recently launched a Bitcoin payments platform, and the journey of that alone taught me so much about Bitcoin and scaling Bitcoin. But I've also had just a lot more exposure into a different side of Bitcoin. And I came into what I've done recently from the position of having a perspective, an opinion about what I wanted Bitcoin to be and how I wanted it to work. And so I built a Lightning wallet because I felt like we needed a better option. And it wasn't the other way around. It's not like I built a Lightning wallet and now I all of a sudden think that everybody should spend Bitcoin. It's because, I thought and felt strongly about spending Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. And then I built the wallet. So, yes, I'm a hypocrite from time to time, but this isn't, I don't think, one of those cases. So I learned a lot about using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. I learned a lot about the differentiation between medium of exchange and store of value and the different types of people that would use both. And I think if I could briefly summarize this, I have like a small analogy that I was just thinking of. It's like two different people get on a cruise ship. One of the guys, let's just say Robin, you're getting on a cruise ship and you just want to go on a cruise and hang out and have a good time. And maybe I'm coming from a place that is a little bit more destitute. Maybe it's like a remote island. There's lots of war, and every day is a struggle to stay alive. So we both get on this ship, which is the ship, in my analogy, it's fiat money. And the ship starts to sink. And as the ship sinks, the water level goes up, and we're noticing it. And we look out overboard into the water, and we see these lifeboats, these life rafts that are just going. And these life rafts, of course, are Bitcoin. So we start doing some investigation, and eventually we come to the conclusion that we want to get on one of these life rafts because the ship's going down. And so when you get on this life raft, what you're thinking about is getting back home, right? You have this home that there's a better place. You have you've had the time to think about getting back home. When I get on the life raft, all I care about is getting off of the sinking ship. And so I think this is, in my opinion, an analogy for how people all over the world view Bitcoin as different forms of money. You have people like, we'll just give the example, Michael Seyr, right? He is the person in this case that is looking to get back home, right? He's using it as a capital asset. He's using it as a stepping stone, and ultimately, wanting to preserve his wealth generationally. And it's an investment, so to speak, for him, at least if I could interpret it that way. And then you have the person that is in, maybe like somewhere in rural Eastern Africa. And these people have currency systems where their government hyperinflates their currency. And what they need more than anything is just a currency that people can't mess with, that their government can't just arbitrarily hyperinflate. And maybe somebody in Venezuela or Turkey or Argentina, where these countries have had major currency issues with their central banks. And these people, the first thing on their mind isn't figuring out how to use Bitcoin as a store of value. It's how to buy their food and sell their food or shelter, right? These more immediate, more acute needs that these people have. And so, I think, we've all heard the analogy of the sinking ship being fiat and Bitcoin being the life raft. But I think it's important to see that there are people that are getting on these life rafts with different perspectives, and they're seeing these life rafts as totally different things. Eventually they come to the same outcome, right? So they're all, you're going to hopefully survive, right? So that's step one, but then you're going to end up in a better place too. So, yeah, I think that's kind of just a big part of my journey, is figuring out that not everybody sees Bitcoin the same way, and that there are different forms of money that are immediately needed by other people around the world, and some of which are in my own country, but I certainly want to make sure that I have a full understanding of what the value is for Bitcoin for people everywhere else too.
And the thing that always amazes me with the comparison, how accurate it is also with the Titanic sinking ship versus like with fiat and Bitcoin. the first ship that left the Titanic, the first lifeboat, had a capacity, and I hope I get the number right from my memory, had a capacity of 65 people, and 28 were on there. People had music playing and danced this when the Titanic started to sink, because you have to remember, it was not like hitting the iceberg, sinking in with like minutes. It was like not like that at all. It took hours for the Titanic to actually sink to the ground. And people didn't, I mean, there's many different reasons why the first lifeboat was leaving half empty. And one possible, like there are many contributing factors. One factor is that it wasn't well trained. They saw later like, oh, the processes and the things were not as good, and so even the crew at some point didn't know what to do and how to prioritize and stuff like that. But a big part of it, people were in denial. They're like, I have a great steak dinner right here. Like, why would I get up and sit on like a small boat and like that ship is not sinking. They're just panicking. And I think that's a lot of people in Fiat right now, where they're comfortable in their steak dinner, and they don't realize that the steak is the least of the problems not in the coming hours, like in the Titanic, but in the coming years and decades to come. And that's why I love the Titanic comparison so much, because like there are lifeboats that left half empty because people didn't realize how bad the situation is, which is very sad to see, honestly.
It's a very powerful analogy of kind of where we are right now, I think, too, with people fleeing to Bitcoin, and a lot of people are in denial about what's happening on the ship.
100%. As you know, we have an end routine on the podcast where the previous guest is kind of asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, when was the last time you truly stepped out of your comfort zone, and what did it teach you?
Give me just a second to think about it.
I love those questions.
Well, to tie it back into Bitcoin, I would say a few months ago, I was contacted by somebody that goes by the pseudonym Gray Satoshi, and he asked if I would be interested in being an educator for his Bitcoin diploma course called Bitcoin Safari TZ, and it was TZ for Tanzania, so primarily focused around people in Eastern Africa to learn about Bitcoin very broadly. And we followed the program, the course of My First Bitcoin or Me Premier Bitcoin, and that was the kind of the curriculum that we used. And that was a big stepping stone for me. I was, I've never really done something like that before, and it was a lot of pressure. I think a lot of it was built up in my head, but I was obviously had my own self-doubts about what if I didn't do something right, or what if I taught somebody the wrong thing or something like that. But ultimately it ended up working out really well, and I was very fortunate to be a part of that program. And now to this day, I'm seeing people that have come through that course, and just in the few months since it's concluded, these people are out and they're doing things in Bitcoin. They're building in Bitcoin and releasing products and helping teach other people about Bitcoin. And it's a really cool thing to see. But that was probably the most recent, at least Bitcoin specific instance of stepping outside of my comfort zone to do something. And I'm glad I did it.
I love that. I think you're a great educator, and I loved our first one. I loved our second episode. So thank you so much for being such an amazing guest on my show. Before I let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions?
On X or Twitter at Adam Simecka. And then the project that I'm building on is Mana, and that's just at Mana Bitcoin on Twitter or manabitcoin.com. In fact, I think the first time I ever talked about Mana publicly was on the first episode of your podcast. That's when I started building it. So
Awesome.
it's kind of
I
cool
love
to
that.
see full circle.
I'm looking forward on the third episode that we're doing and seeing the development with Mana as it kind of started on the podcast. No, not started on the podcast, but like it was the first public appearance.
Yeah, that's really cool. Anyway, thank you so much for having me back, Robin. It's always a pleasure, and it was awesome seeing you in Las Vegas.
Are you coming to any future conferences soon?
I will not be in Prague. I guess this is maybe a good time to let people know. Next week, obviously, this will release after this is already done. But this week, today, I'm hopping on a plane to go to Roswell, New Mexico, to teach a bunch of businesses in the Chamber of Commerce down there and their government on how to use Bitcoin, how to accept Bitcoin as payment, and to talk a little bit about Mana. So for anybody that might not know, Roswell, New Mexico is a U.S. city that they were the first to actually institute a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And they're actually using Mana to process their Lightning payments, so you can actually pay them directly or donate to them. And it's Roswell at manabitcoin.com. So since they're using our infrastructure for Lightning, they wanted to bring me in and talk to a bunch of their businesses. And we actually have a food truck that's already using Mana down there. And hopefully after this week, maybe a lot more. But the idea is to grow the Bitcoin circular economy and help businesses learn about Bitcoin and accept it as well. So yeah, that's a cool project, but I wanted to throw that out there that, it's a cool journey.
Awesome. I just want to, I never said that actually on the podcast. I've said it a little bit on the podcast. I always pre-record my podcast episodes. I've seen that some people are not aware of the fact. For me, it's so obvious, but like if you're just listening to the podcast, maybe it's not as obvious. I usually pre-record between 1 week to 3 weeks ahead. I don't want to have more than 3 weeks because then it's like too much time between recording and publishing, and never less than a week because there's a process with post-production and editing and publishing and all those things. So just because like Bitcoin Prague is literally in 2 days. And when this comes out, Bitcoin Prague will already be like 1 week or 2 weeks old news. But I'm currently working on releasing episodes before they actually go live. So like, I have this YouTube membership, and it's like, I think, $2 or like $1.90 or something like that per month. And I'm working on giving for those members who are already there, the podcast almost in real time. So like 24 to like 48 hours after that. So that people that are really obsessed with timely podcasts, they have the option, like it's €1.90 or something like that per month. If you really want the podcast episode right when it comes out, I'm really working hard on making the process so it actually works like that. Otherwise the podcast wouldn't just be possible every day, because there are days where I'm sick, and if and then days where I'm at Prague, and it's so funny. People come up to me in conferences like, "Oh, today there's no podcast coming. You're at the conference." I'm like, "No, that's not how it works."
I think that's a great idea. Maybe if I could offer a suggestion, I think,
please,
if I was a subscriber of that, which I very well may be now that I know about it, but I think it would be cool if instead of doing a fast, quick edit, like what if you just publish the raw, unedited video for those subscribers? I think that would maybe be cool.
Gosh, yeah.
And then you could do it right away. I mean, you could upload this video in an hour or two.
You mean as a whole different video, because there is a subscriber only content, and then oh gosh, that's even better. There, I can do subscriber only live stream, so the subscribers could actually be in real time with us while recording, and it's only for the YouTube members, and you can literally have it like right there. And then afterwards it comes out as that's a fucking awesome idea. Thank you so much.
I'd pay for that. That's cool.
Because then it's also doesn't matter because it's not like sometimes I record on like noon Vienna time. Sometimes I record at 8 p.m. Vienna time, and sometimes there's like 5 days where I don't record. Then there's like 3 days where I have like 12 recordings. Rare, but like sometimes I have a lot of recordings. So someone can just like tune in on like an afternoon of recordings. It's like they have like 4 podcasts in a row, like almost a marathon. That's a fun idea. And I could even link to my scheduled Google Calendar, so people know when the live stream starts, because it's very easy to just like give that scheduled podcast recording out there for my members. Man, like, oh.
Plus, you kind of get a little bit of like the behind the scenes kind of vibe, you know, like you get a little bit more of the exclusive, like first row, you know, kind of, like I said, just like you're behind the scenes, sort of, you know, unedited. It's raw. It's, I think there's a lot of added value to something like
that. And there could even be, if members actually watch, because I've now, I think like 30 members. So if I record at weird times, there might not be a member that's currently watching. But if it grows, there's probably always like someone watching. And then they could actually also ask questions. Like like we could have like a segment where at the end there's like one member's question that like gets voted up or something like that. Yeah, but like we're extending this podcast for a long time already.
I totally blanked on the question that you asked, but the reason why I answered it the way I did about the whole trip to Roswell is I still have a Fiat job, and so I've already taken off more time than I should have. I'm also going to be having a baby in a few months, so I don't have any more Bitcoin or even any conferences or anything trips planned for the rest of the year, just because, you know, I need to not take off any more work.
Man, congrats on the baby! Like really
Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. Then, yeah, thank you so much. I took already too much of your time for the podcast. I appreciate the time. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.